And we are live. Welcome everyone to this very scary, frightening, horrifying, spine-tingling, bone-chilling, hair-raising live stream with Mel from Sneakers Corner. Mel, welcome.
Great to be back. I was thinking there, I've got an appropriate Halloween name for my channel, Sneakers Corner.
Emphasis on sneakers, huh?
Yeah.
So most people, I'm sure, in the viewing audience are familiar with your channel. Do you want to give us a brief overview of what you do, and more importantly, some recent topics that you've been covering?
Yeah, so the channel is run by myself and a guy called Murad, and we do research into the origins of Islam. And we've been going for the last 2 years, but really going intensely for the past year. And we've been looking at early sources from the 7th century, and we've been looking at people like Robert Hoyland's sources that he's gathered together in his book, Seeing Islam as Others See It. But more recently, we've been developing two particular theses. One is called the Iraqi thesis, which suggests that Islam really began in Iraq. And then Murad is developing the Central Asian thesis, which is really focusing on what happened next, the 8th and 9th century. So we're trying to tie the geographical information with the historical information, trying to get the big picture. And we've been making incredible progress really over the past few months. One of the things that we've been looking at is who Muhammad was really. And the person that I personally have come to the conclusion on is that it might have been Iyas ibn Kapisa al-Tai, the leader of the Tai tribe. And he was the non-Lakhmid king just after King Numan. And he was basically the king of the Lakhmids at the right time in the right place when Muhammad was supposed to be ruling this group. So that's one of the things I've been looking at. I've also been looking at the importance of places like Haran and Edessa. Also been looking at where Mecca might have been. And so with that, I've been trying to tie in with the Petra thesis. So the conclusion I've kind of drawn is that there might have been multiple places of importance. A place where the Qibla pointed to, which could have been Jerusalem or Petra, and then a location which is associated with the birth of Abraham, which was also important to the Abrahamists, which is a place that they called Mecca between Edessa and Haran. And I based this on a source from 741 that specifically mentions that it was between those two locations. One of the things that caused confusion was people thought that Ur mentioned in the text was Ur in southeastern Iraq, which is actually based on an assumption from the 19th century. There was an archaeologist in Iraq that found a site in southeastern Iraq and said that this was Ur. But way back in the 7th and 8th century, people believed that Ur was actually in the same location as Edessa. So that was one of the things, among many discoveries that we've been discovering over the past few months. And I've been collaborating with Jay Smith, and a lot of Jay Smith's new material is taken from both my work and that of Murad. So that's meant to be a brief overview, but hopefully I didn't go on too long there.
No, that's fine. One interesting aspect of your work for me is where and when it intersects with the Quran and Hadith. So as far as you can tell right now, what's the original milieu of the Quran and Hadith?
Sorry, could you repeat that question again? Where is the milieu?
Yeah. What's the original setting of the Quran and Hadith? Geography. Do you see the Quran as being produced by one messenger?
Yeah. So my running sort of assumption at the minute is I believe that it's a much more complex picture than people assume. A lot of people assume it's the product of one person. I believe it's the product of multiple people, multiple editors. It's not the product of one particular time, but it's stretched over a very long period of time, both in terms of the sources that it used, which goes back centuries before the time of Islam. And then even in terms of its final completion date, that's still not fully clear. So you're talking about a long stretch of time. In terms of where it was brought together, I think it probably was somewhere such as Hira in Iraq, and there's another option is Ctesiphon, which is just across the Tigris River. These two locations would be ideal locations for the Quran to be gathered together. The reason for that being you have all the Jewish academies around there. You have the Nestorian Center, which is in Hira, and you also have the Mandaics or the Sabians living in that location. So as you see in the Quran, you see multiple references to, well, actually 3 references to those 3 groups, as if the writers of the Quran were referring to those groups in their area. So that's my sense of it. Now, in terms of the Hadiths were written in parts of Iran and then further east into, I think it's Tajikistan and I probably said that wrong, Uzbekistan and places like that. So that poses problems in terms of the accuracy of the Hadiths, because we're talking about 200 to 300 years after the events and then much further in distance from the original location. So ideally, to have a perfect preservation of the stories of Muhammad, they should really come from local traditions in the area where it was first produced. But you have these stories being produced far, far away by people who really don't know the geography and the locations. And so an awful lot of it can be lost in the mix. So this is why it's such a complex thing to unravel.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I find an undeniable Syriac influence in the Quran and an undeniable Jewish influence. And for me, it seems very difficult to figure out how to put those two together. But that's origins. Now we're going to talk about what? Origins of demons? Your PowerPoint is the demons reveal their game plan. So introduce us to what you're going to be expounding for us.
Yeah. So like up to now, been only looking at natural causes. So in terms of explaining Islam, you look at natural causes, you say what were the precursors in terms of religions. But now I'm not going to be looking at religions per se, but actually considering whether there was a spiritual influence on the formation of Islam, because you have all of these multiple people all working in concert towards a common aim. And interestingly, Robert Hoyland has got lots of interesting 7th century and 8th century sources, which suggests a much more sinister explanation for how Islam began. So this is very controversial stuff. One of the things I would warn our audience is that because we're dealing with things like demonic possession and so on, it's probably advisable that this isn't watched by anyone of a vulnerable disposition, particularly someone who's under the age of 16 or have suffered from mental illnesses and so on. So I'd advise you, this is probably not the video for you. But yeah, having put that warning out of the way. So if we go to slide 2 maybe, and I don't know if you're able to click the run on that.
Yep. Slide 2 is the warning that you just mentioned.
Yeah. So if you maybe you want to click on the run there, just on the startup of the PowerPoint. You know how you can go to full screen on it?
I can't because of my dual screen display. It wants to put one part on one screen and one part on the other. So we'll have to go.
That's fine. No problem. No problem. Okay, so just a little bit of background in terms of terminology. There are 3 words that are often used to define what we're talking about. So temptation is something everyone has some experience of. So what we mean by that is something external. Satan or demons lures a person into doing evil. Nothing to be too concerned with. Oppression and possession is something more internal to the person. So the difference is a matter of degree, essentially. Just below full possession, a person may manifest to some degree, contorting, growling, reacting somewhat negatively to sacramentals, which mean holy objects, and hints of other indications of possession. Now, in a case of oppression, the person may not be even aware that they're under the influence of evil, but they have the mind of evil, if you like, directing them. Now, I don't know if you've had experience of meeting people in that situation. I've had experience of seeing both 2 and 3 at different stages in my life. and it is very unnerving, quite frightening. I've also had the experience of meeting an exorcist and talking to him and asking about his experience, and that was quite revealing. Just to explain a little bit about that, in one story he told me, there was a woman who was a housewife. She presented with the symptoms of being possessed. She went through psychologists and so on, psychiatrists, and eventually she was passed on to him. She spoke to him in Greek and tried to throw him out a window. So we're talking about, typical signs, having knowledge of languages that she formerly didn't have knowledge of, and having supernatural strength. So I have had experience of meeting someone that presented with the symptoms of number 2. This was someone I randomly met, was from a different country to me, in a public setting, and she wouldn't have known me from anywhere, and she was able to reveal my name, both my first name, my surname, details about my life she couldn't possibly have known, and she had a pentagram on her t-shirt, which should have been sort of a warning sign to actually not go near her, but she obviously was involved in the occult, and she had all of this knowledge. Now, she didn't physically hit me, but an exorcist would probably suggest that is having that sort of knowledge would be kind of a warning sign, and maybe room for or reasons to further investigate if that was what was her issue. Now, number 3 is possession. So in cases of full possession, we see the demon taking over the body completely. So the typical signs of it would be supernatural strength, occult knowledge, in other words, knowledge of what's hidden, knowledge of all languages, and detecting the holy. One story I've heard written by an exorcist was that the demon within the person was talking to the priest in Latin, and then basically said to the priest, your knowledge of medieval Latin is terrible. So even while speaking foreign languages, they are mocking. A typical thing that demons tend to do is to try and mislead people. So they typically tend to tell lies. Exorcists sometimes command demons to tell the truth under the authority of Jesus, and they can get information from them in that way. But usually the first protocol is to try and remove them through the authority of Christ. Okay, so we can move on from there.
So you said you have seen someone in stage 3. That's one question. And then someone from the live chat, Veritas, says, I have not, but I'll ask you, has Mel read the book Confessions of an Exorcist by Father Amaroth?
I haven't read that book. Yes, I have seen the third case. So as not to identify the people involved, I won't tell you when or where. What I can tell you is that the demons spoke to me in a Middle Eastern language, and take that for what it's worth. Thankfully, I wasn't hurt at that, but there was an attempt to physically hurt me. And I actually had to intervene, and I said a prayer of deliverance over the person, and thankfully all was well. But it was a very scary experience, and obviously the reason behind me visiting the exorcist was simply to ask him, did I do the right thing, and should I be worried about it, But thankfully he put me at peace, at ease about it. We ended up just trading stories, so it turned out to be quite a relieving experience, really, to talk to an expert who's dealt with it for decades. So it's a very real and scary situation. Priests deal with it a lot nowadays. There's obviously a new interest in the occult and the New Age, and this is creating lots of problems because people are opening portals to evil, and they're experiencing it as a result of these things. So that's probably all I'll say on that. Okay, so if we look at this slide here, these are typical signs or symptoms that an exorcist would look for: contortions, paranormal capabilities, superhuman strength, knowledge of previously unknown languages, spoken usually against Christ or always against Christ. And this is not to be confused with the charismatic form of speaking in tongues. Unnatural body movements, insults, blasphemies, a detestation of holy objects like the cross, icons, or holy water. I think from this, the fact that they respond very negatively to holy objects is kind of confirmation that these are valuable for Christians to have. Appearance of wounds that vanish as quickly as they appear. Thinking oneself possessed is also another symptom. Obviously, with some of these, it's not necessarily proof. It's just a collection of symptoms. And lastly, making sounds or movements like an animal would also be another. But this is not an exhaustive list. There are many more. Okay. Now, two very important things to bear in mind. We bring the gospel to play because obviously the gospel can teach us quite a lot about the truth of this situation. Demons are, first of all, liars. So John 8:44 says, and this is in the words of Jesus, you belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there's no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. So two symptoms, if you like, of evil, of the devil, is lying and murder. These are telltale signs. And ultimately, Jesus says that anyone who lies or anyone who commits murder is influenced by the devil in some way or other. Now, it may not necessarily in terms of possession, but maybe in the form of temptations. Exorcists who act in persona Christi, in other words, in the person of Christ, have authority over them, which includes compelling them to reveal the truth and casting them out. Mark 6:7 says, calling the 12 to him, he began to send them out 2 by 2 and give them authority over impure spirits. So this is something that is not often seen or heard of by most Christians, but this is part of the activity of priests that occurs even to this day. Most Christians will not be aware of this, but it's practiced in most areas of the world. There may be in a particular area of the country only one priest that's assigned to this particular task. It's obviously it requires an awful lot of expertise on the priest's part and also personal holiness and so on to be able to do this work. Okay, so we're now looking at the historical aspect of all of this, considering all of that I've spoken about. I'm going to be using Robert Hoyland's book, Seeing Islam as Others Saw It. And what's interesting is the Elachmites held out as pagans until 593, when the King Numan made his conversion as a result of being relieved by 3 Nestorian churchmen of a demon. So this was quite an interesting discovery that he himself was possessed just at the advent of the period where Islam emerged. So that's quite an interesting detail. So on to the next slide.
When you say held out as pagans, are we to understand from that slide that he converted to Nestorianism?
I would believe so, yeah.
Okay.
Now, it's interesting that in 602, he was assassinated by the Persians. And the reason for that is unclear. Maybe it's because perhaps the Persians were uncomfortable with him becoming a Christian of any sect, particularly. So perhaps that was part of the reason behind his assassination. But in any case, he lost his role, and the person who took over from him was Iyas ibn Kapisa. Why is that name of interest? This is who I believe was Muhammad. So this is a key pivotal moment in the history of Islam.
Excellent. And somebody asked if I could make the slideshow full screen. I can't because of a weird issue with my dual monitor display. So as I go to these slides, I will zoom in for you so you can see them as good as possible.
Yeah. And apologies to everyone. The Gen have been messing with me today. I was able to use my PowerPoint yesterday, no problem. And today it had an update problem. So hence why I'm going this way. So following from that, then we have a record in a Jewish apocalypse which says that Muhammad was possessed. This was written sometime in the 640s, according to Stephen Shoemaker. So to quote there, a fragment preserving the opening section of the Secrets of Rabbi Shimon survives among the Cairo Geniza text and says he raises over them a crazy prophet possessed by a spirit, and he conquers the land for them. So that was the impression that the Jews had of him. Now, some of the Jews were willing to cooperate with Muhammad, but they didn't have a particularly good impression of him. So they considered him crazy, considered him possessed. So make that what you will.
Is his dating relatively secure of that text?
It's speculative. In fairness, he goes through. I think he goes through about 3 or 4 pages explaining why he believes that 640s are a reasonable dating for it. And the reason is that the text itself is looking forward, not looking back, if you know what I mean. So it's looking at it from a positive point of view. Okay, this here is the negative aspect, but the wider text is positive about this Messiah-like figure who has come to free the Jews. Now, had this been written later, you wouldn't have had this, because they would have already had a bad experience of the Arab expansion. So that's the reasoning behind suggesting that this is an early source. It's before the breakdown in the relationship between the Arabs and the Jews. So it's I think he's on good grounds for suggesting it's at least based on an early text.
Okay,
it's a good question.
Yeah, I'm also wondering what the original is there, because is this a positive or a negative nuance? Could you translate crazy prophet as charismatic prophet possessed by a spirit? Could you, so it would be interesting to read Shoemaker's treatment and see how he treats that translation and the nuances from it. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just on the I suppose on the plain reading of it, it doesn't look very positive, but right. there is possibilities that maybe it wasn't meant so negatively. And of course, I suppose looking back, if a person is using the text from an earlier time, there's a possibility at that stage they're now twisting it into a more negative connotation. So yes, that's true. So another source that we're going to be looking at is Anastasius, who writes in the 660s. He produced 2 collections of edifying tales. This is from Robert Hoyland again. The first bears the title Various Narratives of the Humble Monk Anastasius Concerning the Holy Fathers in Sinai, and comprises the doings and sayings of the more charismatic members of the monastery of Sinai, either witnessed by Anastasius himself or related to him by one who was present. They were put together in roughly 660, 1 year after the death of John Climacus. The pre-Islamic Arabs at Sinai seem to have lived in relative peace with the monks and solitaries, seeking their help in time of need and acting as message bearers for them, though occasionally proving a nuisance too. Anastasius clearly does not regard the Muslims favorably. Now, just be cautious. Robert Hoyland is using the word Muslims here in terms of the 660s. This is perhaps anachronistic. I would suggest perhaps a better term might be Hagarenes, Magarai, or proto-Muslims, but we'll just pass that one by. He calls them the nation that has sullied and profaned the holy summit. And in an account of a vision of fire that had appeared on the mountain some years earlier, he writes angrily of some Saracens also present who would express their disbelief and blaspheme the holy place, its icons and its crosses. He jeers at them, saying that no such miracles had occurred in any other religion or in any synagogue of the Jews or Arabs. So Anastasius is really annoyed with the Arabs because they have, in their view, a clear miracle on Mount Sinai, and yet the Arabs not only don't believe it, even though presumably they could see it, but they blasphemed the place, and they said some horrible things about it and about the icons and the crosses. So they're clearly against the Christian viewpoint here.
Okay, and are you suggesting an allusion back to some of those? Some of the characteristics of one of those stages of demon possession at this point, or oppression?
I think Anastasius, if we look at the wider context, is suggesting that. So this is probably one of his early signs of it. He's basically suggesting that the demonic is shown in the behavior of people. So this is actually a very good point, that We normally think of possession in terms of one person, but looser, wider sense, exorcists can talk about the demonic influence in crowds of people. Maybe not in terms of full possession, but maybe something in terms of oppression, or maybe even just in terms of temptation. So in a sense, they're being directed to a common goal. And some, even if we take today's world, I've heard some people suggest that the riots in America have got a demonic aspect to it. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but you can imagine, if you see the parallel, how people at that time might view the reaction of people in a negative way, especially in terms of this.
Excellent. So far we have two 7th century, putatively 7th century sources. One of them mentions a possession of some sort explicitly, and the other is subjective.
Yeah.
Suggestive. So, is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So, I think we can pass this one. I think I've already mentioned that. Okay. So going on with Anastasius, he states clearly that the Saracens are in league with demons. So this is a quote from him. Note well that the demons name the Saracens as their companions, and it is with reason. The latter are perhaps even worse than the demons. So this is strong stuff from Anastasius. Indeed, the demons are frequently much afraid of the mysteries of Christ. I mean, his holy body, the cross, the saints, the relics, the holy oils, and many other things. But these demons of flesh, i.e. the Saracens, as he refers to them, trample all that is under their feet, mock it, set fire to it, and destroy it. So essentially what he's saying is that the Saracens are basically like the sock puppet of the demons. They are doing the demons' bidding, doing the things that the demons themselves can't do. They have no fear of these holy objects, whereas the demons do, but the demons are getting them to do the very things that they want them to do, and destroy the things that they despise. So that's his claim. Obviously, he needs to back that up with evidence, and he will in due course. So he backs this argument with examples. At Damascus, a possessed man named Sartabius was told by his demon that he would be taking temporary leave of him while he accompanied the Arab army on its expedition to the Straits of Abydos of Constantinople. And quote, our prince has sent guards in order that we help our comrades, the Saracens, on the trip to Constantinople. Now, so you can see clearly he's using what the exorcists have recorded to have found from the voice of the demons, but he's also obviously using it as a polemic as well. So we need to be careful of that, obviously, because there's a danger with polemics that a person may twist things, bend things, but at least on the face of it, he seems to be convinced that the demons did suggest that they are in league with the Saracens, or the Saracens are in league with the demons. So this is right in the middle of the 7th century, long before Islam has really taken off. So this is really kind of early days stuff, and this is, if you like, this is the early impression that the Christians have of this new proto-Islam, Now, back in 660, Anastasius goes on to say that he witnessed demons participating in the clearing work commissioned by the Margaritae, or the Hagarenes, on the Temple Mount. And in 670, a secretary at Damascus, John of Bostra, was sent on a mission by the governor to interrogate possessed girls in Antioch. So this is a separate witness now, John of Bostra. So if you just jump on to the next one. So, John of Bostra interviewed, as it were, these girls who were possessed according to them. And from the mouths of the demons within them, they informed John of Bostra that what they fear most from the Christians is their cross, baptism, and the Eucharist. When asked which among all the faiths of the world they prefer, they replied that of our companions, those who do not have any of the three things of which we have spoken, and those who do not confess the Son of Mary to be God or Son of God. Now, we saw earlier on that Jesus said that demons tell lies. So when these exorcists are claiming that this is what the demons had said to them, they have said this as the result of being commanded under the authority of Christ to tell the truth. So basically to reveal their game plan. So obviously this would have been like a secret weapon, if you like, for the Christians at the time to be able to know what was going on in this, if you like, in the spiritual world. And this sort of information would have been dispersed among the Christians. This would have been used in the preaching at the time to warn Christians not to convert to this, the beginnings of this new religion. And to some extent, this would have achieved its goal, and probably many Christians would have heeded the warning. But obviously some did convert to Islam later. But what's interesting is the things that it's saying that the demons detest, which is the cross baptism, the Eucharist, and the belief in Jesus as Son of God or as God. And this essentially are the key elements of what essentially became the belief system in Islam at a later stage. So that's quite interesting there.
And they just to be certain, via the latter's mouths, the demons within them inform John of Bostra that what they fear most. So the they there is referring to the demons.
The demons, yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
There's also in the I'll just go back briefly. The previous slide, Anastasius had witnessed demons participating in the clearing work commissioned on the Temple Mount. That sounds a lot like the Solomonic legends, and the Quran reflects those in Surah 38, where Solomon gets his demons to build his temple for him.
Yeah. So again, that could be influenced by the needs of polemics.
Mm-hmm.
Or we take him on his word and he had a vision and he was able to see that. It's hard to say. All we can say is this is what they claim, and read from it or deduce from it what you may based on that. Okay, so here's another source. Daniel, Bishop of Edessa. He was bishop from 665 to 684. So in key time, really. And this is a very strange tale indeed. And this is evidence really of maybe a widespread infestation of demons at the time. A very troubling, weird time to live in. The monastery of Kenashira in North Syria remained active throughout the 7th century and turned out such respected scholars as Thomas of Heraclea, who revised the New Testament in Syriac, the philosopher and mathematician Severus Sabopt, and the polymath Jacob of Edessa. In the mid-660s, however, it suffered a brief aberration when afflicted by a horde of demons. The anonymous Syriac chronicle of 1234, probably relying on the patriarch Dionysius, tells us that in a nearby village, a stone slab inscribed with Median characters was discovered, under which was a bronze cauldron containing a bronze figurine. Sources were then summoned, for surely people said it was sorcerers who buried this in days of old. Now, just to kind of set the context, we know from artifacts that have been found in Iraq, which is obviously right next door to Syria, that there is a long tradition of belief in sorcery and things like that. They used incantation bowls, where they were, if they wanted something, they would cast a spell, essentially. And from a Christian point of view, this type of thing typically brings demonic influences to bear. It's like opening up a portal. So not particularly a good thing. Okay, so if we just move on to the next one. When the sorcerers, whispered their spells over the little idol, it spoke with them, saying, 60,000 demons are imprisoned in this figurine. And the demons asked, how do you command us? Where shall we go? At this, the sorcerers undid the chain from the neck of the figurine and said, go enter into the monks of the monastery of Kenashira. Just then the monks of that abbey began to suffer many misfortunes and ailments. Many became possessed by demons. They began to crow like cocks and to bleat like goats. They insulted the icons of the saints, calling Peter fool fisherman, Paul skinhead, Thomas one bull, John Bar Aftonia long beard, Saint Ephraim dried up, beardless one, and Saint Theodore, blind man, and many more perversities did these monks speak. So this is a very weird tale indeed. So if we go to the next slide. So the 12th century patriarch chronicler Michael the Syrian gives further details of this incident, which cannot be doubted, for they are in the book of that truthful man, the patriarch Dionysius. In the time of Lord Daniel, Bishop of Edessa, demons took possession of certain brothers in the monastery of Kenashira. The abbot sent and called upon Daniel to find some relief for those unfortunates. He told them to go to St. Jacob's and fetch the body of Bishop Severus. They did not want to give him up, but under pressure they granted a part of him, which is a part of the body of the saint. When this was brought near, the demons began to wail, "Alas for us, that broken one has come. It was not enough for him to drive us from the region of Samosata, but he must come here also." The demons said this because the saint had once fallen from a beast of burden and had been lamed in one foot. One of those possessed by a demon had formerly been a disciple of the bishop, and they threatened the demon in him, saying, "Now this man's master has come to expel you." The demon answered, "I did not enter this man of my own volition, but under compulsion. He killed our master's dog in the upper vineyard, and for that reason he sent me to torment him. My friends he sent to enter into these monks because they would leave the church at the time of the offering and go out to swim and play in those pools of water outside the monastery. Our master was what the demons called some sorcerer. As soon as the monks stood, those youths in front of the right hand of the saint, the demons wailed aloud and came out of him." Now they're suggesting there that because of a lack of piety among the monks, they were susceptible to having this curse placed on them. Okay, so if we just move on.
You have aquatic demons there as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Just like in the Quran. Very interesting.
Yeah. So the third section begins by explaining that the Chalcedonians had occupied the monastery of Kenashira in the time of Domitianus. I've probably pronounced that wrong. Domitius? I don't know if you can do any better than me, but anyway, Bishop of Melitene. And then, as now, the Chalcedonians there were claimed by demons. It continues with a report of how, at a later time, the king ordered the Jacobites to bring the demoniacs and the sorcerer before him for adjudication. So now they're bringing him before an Arab king, and this is when it becomes quite interesting. So if we just on to the next one. Right. Okay. So just to set the context, we have an Arab who's like a proto-Muslim, let's say, and this is a possessed man being brought into his presence. Okay. We took the Diophysites and entered before Abdullah bar Darag, emir and governor of Mesopotamia, who was a Muslim. This is Robert Hoyland's word. Magrier would probably be a better word. When the sorcerer and the possessed stood before the emir, they, the possessed, blamed the sorcerer and made known that he had sent the demons there to the monastery, and that these demons had suffered many torments and afflictions from these broken ones, the bearded one, from their fellow saints. So the emir asked the head of the demons, "Are you many?" He replied, "I am the leader of 40,000 demons." The emir then said, "Is Jesus, son of Mary, your friend?" The demon answered, "He is my enemy. Today he has no power over me. Once he had power over me, and he will again have a time to prevail over me." The emir said to him, "Are you his servant?" He answered, "No, I am the servant of God. Now I'm in revolt against him, but in the end he will have authority over me." Now what's interesting is what the demon says essentially is that he was Abdul Allah, which is the same name as the emir. So in a way, the demon is suggesting that he's in league with the emir, and that he rejects the Jesus of the Christians. So that was quite a significant event. And then it gets even more embarrassing in the next slide. More exorcisms are carried out when a young man appears, presumably a Christian man, with a ring containing a fragment of the cross, this being a fragment of the Holy Cross. The emir's attempt to use his own ring fails, for as the demon asserts, in that one there is no cross, it is the other one we fear. The inferiority of the emir's faith is then demonstrated by the inefficacy of his ring in contrast to that of the Christian youth. So you can imagine how this tale would have gone down among the Christian community at the time. Now, for people living in the 21st century, this is probably very much like Lord of the Rings sort of stuff, and way out there and probably hard to believe. But certainly the Christians of the time would have taken this to heart, and they would have seen this as a major warning sign to them about the dangers of this new cult that was slowly developing before their eyes.
And rings and chains are just frequent in ancient magic anyway. So
yeah, absolutely. Now, so we look at some other examples. Now, the next few slides are really looking at a different sort of side of this, which is the idea that the movie The Ghostbusters, the tagline is, who you going to call? Ghostbusters. Well, when push came to shove, who you going to call? It was the Christians, and particularly the priests. Whenever the proto-Muslims had either a desire to have healings or exorcisms, that's who they typically went to. So, for example, when Ubayd Allah ibn Zayed, the governor of Iraq, had a problem with his foot, he sought the prayers of Mar Abda, a Christian monk. So that would be just a healing miracle. So we've gone to the next one. Now, similar recourse was made by Utbah, governor of Bet Garmai, which is in Kirkuk, to Shaprisho, metropolitan of the region, regarding two of his daughters possessed by demons. So we have here a governor in southern Iraq who goes to a priest or bishop, actually I think it's a bishop, because his two daughters were possessed in order to be exorcised. So why isn't he going to proto-Islam to get his exorcisms? I think one of the suggestions in the recording of this story is that it was only the Christians who were effective at carrying out these exorcisms, whereas the proto-Muslims were unable to do this. Okay. Now, we also find an interesting detail as well. Monks were often in a position to give useful advice, since many had studied medicine at school, as was the case with Rabban Kudawi, who was able to cure and subsequently baptize a daughter of the Caliph Muawiyah. So that's very interesting to think that Muawiyah's daughter was baptized. And if you look at the coins there, these are coins from Muawiyah. You can see the presence of crosses on his coins. Now, the one thing that we can't assert is whether Muawiyah was a Christian. There are lots of contrary evidence that would suggest that he wasn't a Christian and that he was against Christianity. Yet it's quite interesting that we have evidence to suggest that his own daughter was baptized. Okay, now we also have another record from John of Dalem in a book called Syriac Life. So this essentially is like an autobiography written by him. And he was a guy who was born in Hadatta in northern Iraq and became a monk at the age of 13. At the turn of the century, 700 AD, receiving instructions from God, he went to pray in Jerusalem, and he visited the king of the Arabs, Abdul al-Malik bar Marwan, who was residing in Damascus at that time. So if we go on to the next slide. Curing the caliph's daughter earned him a royal missive, which announced to the governor of Beth Arameh and Persia, "Let this holy man build churches and monasteries in our realm wherever he should wish to do so, and let him be given the expenses out of my royal treasury." So John went to Hajjaj in Iraq and received similar guarantees. So what's interesting, at a time when Islam had come into public view and it was vehemently anti-Christian, yes, there were exceptions to the general rule. So Abdul al-Malik, despite his anti-Christian fervor, was willing to turn the other way when it came to someone who had healed his daughter.
Does this have any implication for the Dome of the Rock inscriptions, which many take to be very negative polemics against Christ?
Yeah, there's a contradiction really in terms of Abdul al-Malik. So on the one hand, he has personal experience of kindness by Christians towards him and his family, and yet on the other hand, ideologically, he's still as opposed as ever to the Christians' beliefs. It's quite peculiar, and I suppose psychologically, this is not totally unheard of. People sometimes compartmentalize their thinking. So on the one hand, they're anti-Christian. On the other hand, they're quite grateful when Christians perform a miracle for them. But what's interesting is that the Christians blessed those who cursed them. So even though the Christians were being persecuted by these people, they were still willing to do acts of kindness by, for example, healing his daughter. But this deed didn't seem to change his mind about those inscriptions. So he plowed ahead with those inscriptions and didn't change them. Now, there's actually another detail which adds a little bit more spice to this, because this wasn't the only thing that happened. The caliph needed also someone to heal his son who was possessed. So Abdul al-Malik's son actually was also possessed. So we can see there's a pattern here. And this may not be the full picture. This is just some sources that we have. So John of Dalem was asked by Abdul al-Malik to exorcise his son. So he did so. And in the record, it also says that John also cured Hajjaj of cancer. Now, Hajjaj is obviously also very important in all of this in terms of the origins of Islam, because Hajjaj was central to the Quran in terms of the wording of the Quran, and also in terms of the promotion of the Quran, getting it out there, and even encouraging it to be used in the mosques. So it's interesting, despite the fact that he had a Christian healing him of cancer, again, still didn't influence his religious beliefs, and he was still willing to go ahead with the beginnings of Islam. Now, what's also interesting, to bring it up to today's world, Muslims, even today in the 21st century, still go to monophysite priests in Egypt for exorcisms. And anyone who's doubtful of that can go on YouTube and look for yourself, and you'll see plenty of examples of it. Obviously, people, when they're desperate and they need healing of any kind, they will go to whoever they can if they find that these people are successful. And so there are plenty of examples of Muslims going to these priests and having their demons cast out. This would suggest that the demons fall under the spiritual jurisdiction of monophysite Christianity in that part of the world. And one suggestion that was given to me by Joe, who's a friend of my channel, is that perhaps this might indicate that there's a monophysite connection with the origins of Islam, which is an interesting idea. I don't know if that's entirely true, but this might be the reason why in particular, the monophysite Christian priests seem to have more of a effectiveness in terms of expelling the demons.
Did Joe, in that suggestion, mention anything more about the jurisdiction? Because you do have, in a lot of these religions, a geographical jurisdiction as well. Or did he comment on that?
I think he meant it in terms of geographical jurisdiction. As far,
he did. Okay.
I think he meant in that context, but he was a bit vague in that, and maybe he might comment below whether he meant it in terms of Islam in general or whether he meant it geographical. I kind of took it as geographical, with also maybe because of some of the spiritual. There's more of a spiritual connection between Islam and the monophysite sect. Maybe, I don't know. I'll have to confirm that with him. Okay. So this is just an overview, really, just to kind of give us an insight into all of this. So as we can see, 593, the Lakhmid king Numan was exorcised. The 630s, according to the Jews, Muhammad was reported by them as possessed. In the 660s, the demons declare the Muslims their companions. And then 665, we have this incident in the monastery which was infested with demons, suggesting a much wider infestation at the time. And then in 700, Abdul al-Malik's son was exorcised by John of Dalem, a Christian priest. So this is the environment in which Islam grew out of. There's a lot of suggestions in these stories of a demonic influence in the beginnings of Islam, a certain type of orchestration, a sort of support for the movement, if we can call it that. There's even suggestions by the demons that they consider these Arabs their companions and their compatriots or their comrades. Now, obviously, we have to take into account the fact that this may have polemical purposes, so we can't read too much into it, but it's certainly worth bearing in mind. If we bear in mind what's happening in France over the past couple of weeks, we think about lots of those attacks on Christians, the demonic aspect to it, the brutal murders of innocent people who are simply going about their business. We saw an incident there recently in, I think it was in England, where a cross was being torn down. Am I right in thinking it was England,
Yes.
or was it America?
I think UK is what I saw. I don't know any more specifics than that. But
yeah. So there is and obviously going back a few years, we saw with ISIS a very common thing they did was they knocked crosses off churches. So we see lots of parallels there between what the exorcists were discovering through communication with the demons and what you see then practice in later Islam. So if we go to the last slide, we'll just come to our conclusions. So according to the demons' words, while being exorcised, the Margarite were our comrades and our companions. From Newman to Abdul al-Malik, we see repeated demonic infestations in the Arab leadership and in the wider community. Any faith which does not have the cross baptism, the Eucharist, and that does not confess the Son of Mary to be God or Son of God is the demon's preferred faith. The Jews record Muhammad, who we believe to be Iyas ibn Kapisa, as being possessed, and it should also be noted that the Islamic tradition also refers to Muhammad as being bewitched, even using it as an excuse for the satanic verses. Islam grew out of an environment of demonic infestation, but has no response to it, as can be evidenced from these 7th century examples. Note this explains why much of the Islamic world today is made up of folk Islamic traditions, for example, the evil eye, Fatima's hand, and Giri Giri. In other words, there's nothing within Islam itself to provide any cures with this, so they have to turn to folk traditions like these ones here to try and attempt to ward off evil and so on. Those very things that Muslims hated and were fearful of in the 7th century, the cross, baptism, and the Eucharist, are the very things that we love as Christians because they are central to everything we believe in Christianity. And there I end it.
So this is interesting, Mel, because you're very much interested in history, and I'm primarily, I tend towards the theological side of things. Yeah. And this is something that I've noticed, and I did a live stream with Al-Fadi on this, and I plan to release it on my channel at some point. In the Quran and in the Hadith, Satan is very, very close to the believers. Whether it's in the bridge of the nose, whether you have Quran in Surah 22, well, Satan casts something into the mouths of all the messengers. You have the last 2 surahs of the Quran, which are dedicated to taking refuge from evil spirits and so forth. And it's one of those examples of the Quran where you can look at something that's in the Bible and then compare it to the Quran, and there's a regression. And so you look at, you cited a couple of verses earlier, and there are a whole lot more in the Gospels and in Acts, which clearly describe the power of the apostles over demons. And then when we fast forward to the Quran and the Hadith traditions, we see that Satan is very, very close to you, and something to be feared on a daily basis. Yeah. And so this takes us into some good questions that we've had. And let me start up here with, did you have any comment on that?
Well, one thing I would suggest that is you unshare the PowerPoints. So we're back. Yeah. Yes, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. There are lots of indications of that influence right through the Quran and the Hadith. What struck me when I read Al-Bukhari was the amount of superstitions that were present right through the entire set of hadiths. Many of them very silly, but there was so many sort of rituals that you had to do to ward off evil. There was, there was an emphasis on numerology. Things had to be done a certain number of times. Like you had to eat the right number of dates. I can't remember, was it pairs or odd numbers you had to eat, things like that. There were, weird instructions about how you clean yourself after you go to the toilet, how you wash yourself a certain way, and so on. And I can imagine as a Muslim, for Muslims out there, trying to follow all of these instructions must be quite oppressive. In Christianity, there are a few guidelines, but then there's, a sense of freedom there, and you use your own judgment and your own freedom. But here, every little detail of your life is micromanaged, and all because of this great fear of Satan and the evil spirits. And there doesn't seem to be any let up in that fear. And a very common thing that I often see written by Muslims is they look at the possibility of leaving Islam, but they say, "Oh, I'm afraid to, because I'm afraid I will go to hell if I leave Islam," because this is so engendered, this fear of the hellfires and so on. But yes, Islam doesn't offer any reassurance. All it offers is a sense of foreboding fear. And the example of Muhammad in the cave, it doesn't exactly fill anyone with confidence either, because he seemed to have this symptoms of possession himself, and one of the signs of possession is suicidal thoughts, and you have Muhammad attempting to throw himself off a mountain, and Khadija trying to persuade him not to, and things like that. So that's all I want to say on that.
Yeah, and that goes into one question that was asked. Many of Muhammad's actions after his encounter with Jibril, and the official sources, or this is a comment, do indicate he encountered a demon. And what's interesting about Muhammad is that you have him reciting in the Hadith, you have him reciting the surahs of refuge in the Quran, you have Jibril reciting them for him. Muhammad's hair was supposedly a cure for the evil eye, and on and on and on. But Muhammad was still bewitched. He couldn't escape the grasp of the dark powers. There's a question: do Muslims believe they are possessed by demons or jinns? Absolutely, demon possession, jinn possession is a very real thing in the Muslim world. And in my live stream with Al Fadi, I discussed a modern Muslim, I believe he's a psychologist, and his perspective on that as well. So absolutely, it's very real. The evil eye that Mel mentioned, the evil eye is a very popular belief, especially in the Middle East. And there are accounts in the Hadith of someone being immobilized by the evil eye. In this case, it was envy. Evil eye is frequently associated with envy. And one person saw someone else bathing, and man, he looked good, and the guy dropped dead. Not dropped dead, but he was incapacitated and needed to be revived by a ritual. So I should probably release that video soon.
Yeah. Well, what I find interesting is, and I'd encourage any out there who want to take the time to do this, if you compare the story of what happened to Muhammad in the cave and you read the account of Anthony of the Desert, the monk that was supposedly attacked by demons in a cave in Egypt I think it's the 3rd or 4th century, he comes out of it really well. He never afraid of the demons. The demons are cowering before him, and it's almost like a cartoon, because they go into it trying to scare him. He's not frightened by them, and he ends up winning every time, and they're even more determined to try and defeat him. Whereas if you contrast it with Muhammad is cowering in fear. He doesn't have a clue what's going on. He doesn't understand anything. So you see two very different types of characters if you compare those two.
This is a bit difficult. I think the questions at the end, I'm not quite sure what the comment is, but there is an authentic report that Muhammad, Syed, whoever comes from this door, he will be an apostate. Then Muawiyah comes from this door. Do you think, I'm not sure what that means, but do you think Muawiyah was a Christian?
It's a confused set of evidence. I don't know exactly what he was. I would say my best guess was that he was an Abrahamist, and he might have leaned to some of the beliefs of Christians, but there was a letter to the Byzantine emperor. I think was it Constantine or Constance, maybe Constance, and he basically says to him to reject the Jesus of his youth and come to the God of Abraham. So that would, to me, would suggest that he was more an Abrahamist. But I think that's still an open question, because I think we need to find more solid evidence. But I think probably he was quite confused in terms of religion generally.
Ben Yosef, thank you for the super chat. This question is about 1 Timothy 4:1-5, so I'll just read it. Now, the Spirit expressly says that in later times some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons, through the insincerity of liars whose consciences are seared, who forbid marriage and require abstinence from foods that God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. For everything created by God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is made holy by the word of God and prayer. And the question for you, Mel, is, would this apply more to the demonic aspect of Islam than the frequency of possession in its foundations and association with supernatural? So I think the question is there a line of continuity from what you've described to the present, or is this something more that's kind of a sign of the last times, according to 1 Timothy 4?
That's a good question. I think this thread that I've looked at for 100 years could easily be continued right through the last 1400 years, right up to the current moment. I don't know if I'm answering the question. I do agree that this is a clear prophecy of Islam. It definitely specifically applies to Islam. But I think in terms of its original meaning, and I'm not a theologian by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it can be applied more generally, but it also has a particular specific application when we talk about Islam. Yeah.
And you can definitely look at very specific superstitions, like you mentioned, like the evil eye, that are contiguous. I mean, this goes back to the ancient Near East, so it's probably a mixture. Some of it is contiguous, and some is more perhaps innovative. This is a question that says Muhammad wanted to kill himself, and his first reaction was that he was possessed by a jinn. What is odd, though, it's clear Muslims knew demons existed. Why rebrand them as jinn? Of course, that goes into I think, kind of the historicity of the account. If it's not historical, why would you make it up that Muhammad thought his angel was a jinn?
Yeah. Well, I'd say my first initial reaction is that believing yourself possessed is actually one of the symptoms of actually being possessed. So that's actually a red flag straight off. But apart from that, I think the changing of the word from demons to jinn is probably under Persian influence. That seems to be more a Persian belief. So perhaps it was when Islam interacted with the Zoroastrians that they picked up that terminology. That's my take on it. I don't know if others would agree, but so you kind of you got lots of different theologies that are being mixed together, and they don't really fit very well. It's like oil and water. So you got these real odd sort of associations that make our life a little bit more difficult when you're trying to untangle it all. But that's what I would say on that one. Yeah,
I was wondering, is there a particular Arabic word that you're targeting when you're talking about demon possession? Would it be jinn, or would it be the shaitan? Like, if we wanted to carry your research into the Quran or the Hadith, if there was a particular Arabic word that you would kind of suggest?
I wouldn't narrow it down to one or the other. I would probably include all of them, because when you're talking about possession, you're not always talking about Satan possessing someone. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you're just talking about other demons. So I think it's easier just to keep it more generic, Yeah, I don't know if that's any help.
Excellent. Mel, what's coming up next?
Well, the short answer is I don't know, because it all depends on what I discover. I'm probably going to be doing a lot more reading over the next few weeks. There's lots of things that I've left on hold, as I've put out new material. So it's been, the last couple of months has been a kind of a hell for leather with lots of, pardon the pun, with lots of videos going out on different topics. And I like to kind of send them out while they're warm, if you like, and while they're still fresh in my mind. But I hope to have some new guests coming on my channel over the coming weeks. But yeah, the honest answer is I don't know, because literally I could open up a book tomorrow and something drops in my lap, and then away with some new research. But certainly Murad has got a few videos planned over the next few months. He's going to be doing a talk on the Exodus. He's found new evidence in relation to that. So he's going to be looking at the historical underpinnings to the story of the Exodus. So that should be interesting. He has also got a new video coming on Iran. He hasn't told me exactly what it is, but he's got some sources that he wants to explore. And there's also a debate coming up between Bala and Murad in relation to dual carne. And they are in no rush to start, because they are not going to compete with each other until they're both 100% confident of victory. So
yeah.
So that's the idea of is dual carne Cyrus or Alexander, for those who are not.
Yeah, that's. I would like to see that. That would be very interesting. Yeah. So, but you've been talking about, like you said, no rush. You've been talking about that, as I recall, for some time. so there's a lot of hype. It's time to deliver, Mel. It's time to deliver.
I think what I might do is I might just set a date and say, right, lads, this is it. You've got to work towards this date, because I think they could literally just drag it on and on and on.
Yeah. By the time they're finished, they'll have 2 PhD dissertations that they're going back and forth with. I'll address one more comment just to throw an interesting detail in as we conclude, and that is the comment that the Muslims, even rebranded Satan as jinn. Mark Dury, in his book, The Quran and Its Biblical Reflexes, describes his study of the word Satan or Satan in the Quran, the Shaitan, and concludes from his etymological study that it's actually a pre-Arabic word which refers to a kind of Arabian viper. And some of the verses in the Quran reflect that original meaning. So I'll just read it, one example.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so the Quran says, its fruits are like the heads of Satans. Okay, so there you can see like the heads of Satans. That's Surah 37, by the way. Verse 65. So there you have the heads of the Satans. That's like the viper, right? And so you have this, a venomous serpent. So you have this that same nuance. And then you have in Surah 7:16, Satan said, or Iblis, because you have made me heir, I shall indeed sit and wait for them on your straight path. So now you have the image of a serpent lying in wait on a straight path. And that does tie into the jinn. He says they rebranded Satan as a jinn. You have the command to bow before the angels, or said to the angels to bow. And then Satan seems included in that command, and they prostrated, except him. He was one of the jinn. So then the question is, okay, is jinn an actual ontological category in the Quran, and how does that interact with the Satans? But Mark Dury does have a good study on that for those who are interested.
One of the things I would say is that Islam seems to be turning the clock back here on this one, because in pre-Christian times, the gods were often not either good or evil, but a mixture of the two. They were more human-like. And so perhaps by rebranding Satan as jinn, they're kind of bringing that kind of aspect back into the picture. And it's a kind of confusing idea. So instead of it being clearly this is an evil being, it's more a kind of it can be good sometimes, it can be bad other times, and I think this confuses and clouds things a lot in terms of our sense of what's good and what's bad there. Same with Allah himself, also has that ambiguity in terms of what he considers to be good and what he considers bad. And it basically comes down to whatever pleases him, whatever he wants good to be good is good, rather than it being something objective, so.
Absolutely. Allah inspires the soul with both its good and its depravity, says the
Yeah,
Quran.
yeah.
Everyone go to Mel's channel to check out a lot more of his excellent work as well as the work of his collaborators. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you for the live chats. Thank you for the questions. And Mel, thanks to you for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.